Hello, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents. Welcome to another episode of the Social Work Rants podcast. I'm your host, Bash Moreno. Saludos a todos. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for tuning in wherever you are watching this podcast or listening to the podcast. You can listen to the podcast on all audio platforms and also watch it on YouTube. Follow the podcast on Instagram at the Social Work Rants Podcast. That's all one word. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Social Work Rants and hit the like button on Facebook, aka Meta. Type in the Social Work Rants Podcast and hit that like button. Thank you, everybody, for all your love or support. Gracias a todos por su apoyo. If you hear my voice a little, I sound like a little like Barry Whitish. As of this recording, went to the Latinx and Social Work Volume 2 book launch and met so many great people. Met my fellow co-authors. I'm one of the contributing authors. These are the books. Gotta excuse like my background. So I call it the Holy Trinity of books, with my book Trying Through Pain, How to Maximize Your Full Potential During Hard Times, and Latinx and Social Work in English and in Spanish. Both books are available on Amazon. Go get your copies. Is a great read. I still got to read my Latinx and Social Work Volume 2. I just know my page is 231 in English and 251 in the Spanish edition. So I just touched the books. I haven't read them yet. So get your books. Definitely it was a whole process. Like I mentioned on the podcast, I literally published my book, uh, looking for a new job, wrote my chapter Latinx and Social Work, and planned a wedding all in a matter of like months. So it was a crazy, crazy time that I'm still, and I started a new job. So it's like it's been a whirlwind. 2022 has been an absolute blessing. Besides the loss of my favorite aunt in PR, like 2022 has been like absolutely uh an amazing time. Also, October 16th, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, I working with a nonprofit, Puerto Rico Rise Up. We are collaborating on relief efforts for Puerto Rico due to Hurricane Fiona. I'm hosting a Zumba event. 12 p.m. Eastern Time is $20 a person. Is on eventbrite.com. I'll put it in the show notes. Definitely get your tickets. 300 people. I need 300 people. You do the math. That's like $6,000. If you can't make it, definitely donate. We're trying to make money. They've been on the ground since like 2 days after the hurricane hit and giving supplies to people and just doing the work that they're doing. So it was a great organization. I'm happy to collaborate with them, and let's help out people because PR is already forgotten thanks to the Hurricane Ian that hit Florida and South Carolina, and PA, Delaware, like we got all this rain, and New York got all this rain from Ian. So it's like we the PRs are already kind of forgotten about. So we can't forget PR because the U.S. government already trashes PR as it is. So that being said, my guest is the beauty of patience and trying to work things out. Finally got my man Stephen Miller on the podcast. Going back and forth with the emails and DMs, like, and just life happens. I'm like, I can't do it. So let's come up with a new date. So we're here, we making it happen. Steven, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, just busy, busy, busy.
Yeah, no, I can definitely feel on that because, yeah, going to school part time, working full time, trying to take care of 3-year-old twin boys.
Wow.
It's life, yeah. I mean, and trying to do all this advocacy stuff too on the side. So, yeah, I get busy.
Nah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So let people know who you are and what you're doing our wonderful yet complicated field of social work.
Yeah, so I'm Stephen Miller. I'm a part-time MSW student at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And one of my big efforts right now is really to promote discussion and education regarding infertility and mental health. this is something like we rarely talk about in the general public, and especially not even in social work in general. Like we don't, I've seen very little talk about this, even though like how prevalent it is. Because in the United States, infertility impacts about 1 in 8 couples, which is roughly around 7.4 million people in the United States. For me, I think it's a higher number because a lot of those statistics are for people that are going to do fertility treatments, right? I mean, that's kind of where the statistics come from, but I also think about what the people can't afford it.
Right.
That's another thing that we can get into, but a lot of times like we don't even bring it up in therapy, right? I mean, we don't in intakes like we don't talk about like, hey, have you had any infertility or have you had a miscarriage or anything like that. So my idea is like if we're not talking about it in an educational setting, like for counselors or future clinicians, and somebody comes into your door, how are you supposed to best support them if we're not talking about
No, yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of the focus, and rightfully so, is on women, but we men, we go through these issues too, and of course the stigma. Oh, the joke is, oh, you shooting blanks, and like this toxic masculinity that comes across like that. But is it serious if you got a partner that you're trying to build a life with, you trying to marry a partner, obviously talking about a heterosexual or even not,
it, right?
even it doesn't matter. Like somebody trying to have a baby and start a family, and you're already married or you're engaged, like have that talk about having kids, and it's like okay, now you just hit a bump in the road, and like oh, and this topic kind of infertility kind of leads to like, all right, you can't have a kid, then I'm going to find somebody to have a kid with, and it's like causing frictions in relationships and stuff like that. So it needs to be talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. And oftentimes, I mean, like we have this idea growing up of what that future looks like. Now, like women get inundated with, motherhood, like from a really early age. Men, we don't get that as much, right? I mean, like
Right.
a lot of us are given us like focusing on occupation and career goals and stuff. But I think a lot of us do like grow up thinking like, I would love to have a family someday, like so we have this idea of what this looks like and what our path looks like. And it's we also get this narrative though too that in sex ed in school, right? How many times does somebody say you can have sex once and get pregnant?
No,
Right? I
absolutely.
mean, like we always get told that like you can have sex once, get pregnant, but that really instills this narrative that getting pregnant is really super easy, and it's not the case for a lot of people. Like
Right.
it's a difficult journey, so like you bring that in, yeah, like, and you're just, yep, I'm just gonna get married, or like I'm gonna, get in a relationship, have kids, and get married, whatever your situation is. You have this idea of what your, essentially reproductive story is going to look like, and when you hit that roadblock, people can't make sense of it.
Right.
Like, and especially for men, like I know, like when I was diagnosed with male infertility, like I had like a low sperm count. I didn't even realize infertility was a thing for men.
Mm,
I didn't even realize infertility was a thing at all because like it's never been really discussed. Like even within like our family, like even though like I know for me, like my mom had a miscarriage between me and my sister,
okay.
but it was never talked about, you
Mm,
know, and so like you create this idea and it's like, yep, we're just gonna have kids and stuff like that. And then like I said, when it doesn't happen, it's a huge shocker, and especially for some of the men that find out that they don't have any sperm, like they're literally shooting blanks, it's a lot of them are just completely distraught and devastated, because that whole picture then gets turned upside down of like, okay, now what do we do?
now, now I know there's always been like, I guess like the myth would be like the right word, or like, or if you wear like tidy whities, like it sounds funny, but like
Yeah.
that's always been the myth. If you wear tidy whities, or you start smoking weed, or any type of like drugs like early, like it affects your sperm count. Is there like as far as you know, like those are just myths, or there's some truth to that.
So the boxers and briefs, right? Debate. I mean, that is something where I know research has shown that that's not really a huge factor. I mean, it's very minimal. Like, I mean, it wouldn't cause like a drastic difference if you changed boxers. But when it comes to like lifestyle choices, so like smoking marijuana, smoking weed, smoking cigarettes, drinking, excessively, like heavy drinking and stuff, like those all impact infertility or your sperm quality. The other thing too is hot tubs. Like, so, going to
Oh,
hot tubs and stuff, like, because essentially, where sperm's produced in testicles, like it's outside of your body. There's a reason why it's out there, because it has to be maintained a certain temperature that's colder than your body temperature. So when those get basically cooked, like it impacts it and stuff, like, but it's not one of those things where it impacts it like your whole life. But it's usually, it takes about 3 months for your body to regenerate sperm.
wow,
But
interesting.
the interesting thing though too is I think we all know that like women have a set amount of eggs, right? I mean, like they have a set amount and they don't gain anymore.
Right.
The interesting thing is like, yes, men like have basically that same thing, like they don't have lose anything, but as we age, there's research that shows that sperm quality declines, and that the sperm quality actually contributes to a lot of like birth defects, sometimes autism, like, and it just causes some chromosomal issues and stuff as as men get older.
Wow. That's so interesting. 'Cause I know, like, I always heard that, like, growing up as a teenager, and yeah, you're going back to sex ed. Like, I don't recall like any talk in terms of like infertility. Like, it wasn't until being an adult and watching, TV, or different drama shows, or just having friends, or even myself, like, my first wife having like, issues and like miscarriages and stuff. So, or friends who like had like miscarriages too. So it's like it's stuff that need to be talked about. Always like sex ed, like focus like on like, no, you said like get pregnant, like have sex one time, you can get
Yeah,
pregnant, or like talk about the STDs, and like for me, like they definitely show like the videos and show pictures, or like your pubic areas like being like black and purple and all that stuff. That was like
right,
traumatizing.
right,
That I like never having sex. Like, I don't want that on my
yeah,
privates. Like, get out of here. So it's like,
right. And I think there's like some intention in that, because like we don't want teen pregnancies, like,
no, of
so there's
course,
some intention in that. But I'm just thinking about like when they're older, when you're in that phase of like you want to start building your family, like we don't talk about like what are things you can do to help conceive a child. We don't talk about those lifestyle factors. It's often like people come to it and they're having struggles and they're just like, what, like I said, they don't think it's a thing, you know. Because I it's crazy. So I did a talk at Northern Michigan University, which is my alma mater, because I have a psychology degree. And I asked, and it was maybe about 20 students, graduate students from psychology, and I asked, like, how many of you know what infertility is? And only two people rose their hand, and they were both probably in their 30s or 40s, right? One of them was the department head's wife, and one of them was like an older student. None of the ones in their 20s like knew what this was.
mm,
So, like I said, that just instills that narrative. They think like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna, get married someday, or I'm just gonna have kids, or I mean, some people choose child free by choice,
right,
but yeah, I mean, I feel like this field, I mean, and this field in general is new, like it's newer compared to social work as a whole, right?
right.
I mean, the first child born by IVF was 1978, and that was Louisa Brown in the UK. And Elizabeth Carr, which is her name now, was in 1981, was the first born IVF child in the United States. So you really think about it, that's really not that long ago,
Yeah,
you
this
know,
is 40 years ago.
right? And compared to like when Jane Addams and, like, and did all that, like started all this, like we've been doing this for a number of years, and this is like a newer field, even the medical field.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Even like, even for myself, nobody know this, but this is what the podcast is all about. Like, even like myself, like went to a doctor and I was told I had like low sperm count, and that hit home because I knew like my wife at the time having like her own health issues a little bit, so
Mm,
you kind of like take it for granted. Okay, is you like can't be me, like so, at the time, and then it's like, oh shoot, it's me, and
yeah.
or like a combination of the both of us, and it's like, but yeah, 2 kids later, like we we had two beautiful kids after the
Yeah.
fact, so it's kind of like doctors, I proved you wrong, so it's
Yeah.
like,
That's
but
awesome. Like,
like,
but like when, like I said, like for me, like when I got that news, like I remember like before I even took, like, or did the test, right?
mm,
And I remember thinking, like, I just pray to God it's not me, because I knew the guilt that I would feel, like that I was going to be the barrier to something that she's always wanted.
right,
Like she's always wanted to be a mom. Like we've talked about having, like, and if like I was a parent, it's like I don't know how I could handle that, you know. And like when I found out like it was low sperm count, like I just was like shocked. I'm like, and then what a lot of people do is they start thinking about their past. It's like, okay, what was it? What did I do to cause this? Like what did I, like what were some things that I did? Like, and try to make some meaning, or like find some causation for it.
right,
And oftentimes, you're like, it's not, like there's nothing
yeah,
that can cause, because research for men's reproductive health is so limited compared to women. Because I think, like I said, historically, we've all
yeah,
like heard that it's a woman's issue. So in the
right.
medical field, and I think men and their egos, right,
Mhm.
sometimes
No,
like
it's true.
focused on that, right? Because I mean, you can see about 30 to probably like, 30 different things, that could be causing like female infertility. And for men, it's like five.
Wow.
Like there's not a lot of research showing about like, okay, what causes low sperm count? Like, are there ways to improve it? Like, and like there's some like supplements that, like, but even then it's like it's not enough to get you back to normal. You know what I mean? So
Right.
yeah.
No, no, is interesting, is fascinating that, just the research, like, you hear IBF and you hear all these options like for women. Okay, like what about, options for men? Like if it's the men's fault and not the woman's, I guess, fault.
Yeah.
It's not the right word, but it's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
male, like
It's male
male
factor.
is
Yeah.
male factor and not a female factor. Is like, what is a man supposed to do, like to
Right.
to have the child? I mean, you talking about like adoptions, and adoptions cost money, and
Yep. It
and
costs
make
just as much as IVF. I mean, IVF on average, because it says it takes about 3 cycles on average to achieve like a pregnancy and have a live birth. So it's about like $46,500,
mm,
like for IVF, and that's including medications. That's not including like if you have to travel, like if you have to stay at a hotel. I mean, like that's just like the medications and cycles. And then it's like usually it's like $500 just like if you have more than one embryo, like, and if you like you can freeze them, but then you're paying $500 a year to store them.
right.
So like it is costly, and I know like when my wife and I were doing IVF, like I jokingly said, like if we were gonna have a girl, I said like we're gonna call her Mercedes because it costs just about the same, you know. And she was
I
like, "We're
like
not
that.
naming her Mercedes," and I'm like, "It's like what?" I'm like, it costs a lot, but then you think about in the LGBT community, like same-sex couples, like gay men, like trying to see if they have to use a surrogate,
Mhm, yeah.
and the range like it costs for to use a gestational surrogate ranges from like literally $80,000 to 200,000.
Wow.
So you think about like access, like who truly does have access,
Hmm.
with like costs like that, and a lot of even states, like I know Maryland has just changed it as of January 1st, 2021, but only 19 states have mandated coverage. And Maryland was one of them, but Maryland had a mandate where it was only accessible for married couples.
Mm,
So that finally, like I said, in 2021 got reversed. So then that opened up opportunities for same-sex couples to utilize IVF and have it covered by insurance. Because insurance was using like the definition, which the definition of infertility is not being able to conceive a child after unprotected sex. You know, if you're 35 and younger, it's a year. If you're 35 and older, it's 6 months.
mm,
And that's because of, women's, equality like declines and like their
right.
diminishes and stuff. Um, so they were looking at that, and for same-sex relate, they're just like, well, they can't conceive because they don't have the right parts, right? So, and a lot of times, like they call that situational infertility, where it's factors other than like you have the same reproductive parts.
Right. Uh, you're just giving like a whole just a lot of great information about it. I'm like just like mind blown just hearing all this because like I said earlier, like you hear like IBF and you hear all this other stuff and like same sex couples wanting. I didn't know it costs that much money. That's like a lot of
Yeah,
people's like student loan debt. Like they try
right.
to get.
Yeah, and I've had like a
It's
classmate of
crazy.
mine where like his sister is in a same-sex relationship, and she essentially has to either, if she wanted a family, she had to either pick her career or pick a family because like it costs so much that
Hmm.
and I don't know where choice is. I mean, it's a hard choice to make because like
Yeah.
you're putting all the money in your career, and I think people assume that LGBT people, like because they don't have the right parts, like don't want kids, and that's not the case. You know, it's really just not. I mean, I this is why, like I say, I feel like social work has so much to offer. When you think about advocacy and like macro level
Right.
practice, and like it's because, like I said, only 19 states have mandate coverage. Like Wisconsin's not one of them, so we're paying out of pocket. So people are
Wow.
taking out like second mortgages. They're taking like health loans, which are like their interest rates like 18%. Like they're borrowing from family, which I know that could be a source of contention with a couple. Like
No, of course.
depending on their experience. But and not even just like the financial piece. There was some excellent research, and it's old research, but from 1993. So Alice Domar, Friedman, and Zuttermeister did this research from Boston IVF, and they compared the psychological distress with people who have been diagnosed with cancer, infertility, HIV, and then like had a heart attack, I think, or cardiac arrest, or cardiac issues. And what their research showed was between receiving the people receiving a cancer diagnosis and people receiving a diagnosis of infertility,
Hmm.
that there was no equivalent difference in the psychological distress that was experienced. So
Wow.
meaning like the infertility diagnosis is basically the same psychological distress like you would imagine receiving from a cancer diagnosis.
Mm. Nah, I could see that too because it was something that you really want and it's not happening. Like that takes a toll like on you mentally. It could take a toll on you physically too. So
Yeah.
I could totally see why that is. Even when I got the news, I was like sitting on the couch bawling, crying, and it's like. But then again, like I got a 13-year-old son and a 10-year-old
Yeah.
daughter after the fact. So like it's just no. Sometimes it's just God is like, here you go. It's
Yeah.
here are the
See,
kids, and and it happens out of nowhere. So like we least
yeah.
suspect it. So it's miracles do happen. No medical advances have come like so far and continue. Doctors do amazing things every day.
Yeah.
Now talking about IBF, and I know that IBF has been like talked about more only because of this you know, you know, Supreme Court with their decision and like the
Yeah.
doctors are like scrambling like based on what state you're in terms of like possibly now doing things against the law, but is under they can't do it under their practice, but it's like, do I focus on keeping my license or do I risk going to jail helping out a person? So it's kind of like an ethical dilemma thanks to this the Supreme Court decision on Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, and from it really, like I said, it really varies on state to state, and it probably varies honestly from day to day, you know.
Absolutely.
But really, I mean, the thing that's most concerning for, I guess, like the fertility world is like the personhood bills,
What is
because
that?
that identifies an embryo like as a person.
Mm,
So with IVF, like you essentially take the sperm, eggs, like you put it in a petri dish, and then you put it together, see if it fertilizes. And oftentimes, you know, like fertility clinics will wait 5 days, and like 5 days will get you to the blastocyst stage. And then people that are doing frozen embryo transfers, like all those embryos get frozen. Now, some people choose to do genetic testing
mhm,
on them. And the reason for that is you want to make sure, like, if there's some chromosome abnormalities, the likelihood of it resulting in a live pregnancy is a lot smaller. So you want to make sure, like, you have the best chance,
mhm,
right? So if if they label an embryo as a person, that really, you can't freeze people, right?
right.
You can't freeze people, so that eliminates that whole part of it, right?
Mhm,
You can't, like, I mean, I guess you could, but it's like, how would you get consent for genetic testing? Because then genetic testing really helps reduce the amount of cycles and costs for people, so that would inhibit the cycles possibly, you know, and how much access people and how much money you have to pay for it. And two, let's just say like you have 7 or 8 embryos frozen, you know, like, and you have 2 children, and like you and your partner or you self decide like, yep, that I'm done building my family. Now, what do you do with the frozen embryos?
right.
Right? If you discard them, you're technically killing them,
Mm,
right? So, like, I know some of the legislation around abortion care, like in Oklahoma, from what, and this is what I've heard from a doctor, so it's not like I've actually read this, but from I heard from a doctor that does this work, fertility work, and in the legislation it said, you know, like, it technically, I think that like, life begins when at conception inside the woman's body or womb. Now IVF, the embryo's outside.
right.
So I think, you know, and I think there's some politicians right out there that they don't, most people don't talk about this, right? Most people have no awareness unless you've gone through it, you know, like, and I don't think they realize the implications of some of these laws, you know, because I would listen to a podcast where there is a doctor doing some advocacy work in this legislation. And he was saying, like, when he was talking to one of the politicians that he knew, and he told him, it's like, do you know like how this would affect IVF? You know, like, and then he asked one of his staffers and stuff, is like, is this true? Like, is this possibly could be affected? You know, and the staffer was like, well, yeah, technically, yeah, it could be, you know, affected and stuff. And like he changed his viewpoint, you know,
Mm,
like, or wanted to like change some of the legislation and verbiage around it,
right.
you know, because I think politicians see that as people wanting to build their families, right? And then, but they're also not seeing that some of those things regarding abortion care impacts, you know, the fertility world.
Yeah, I think many politicians are misinformed or just don't know, and they just like, this is what I believe in, and they don't understand, or many just don't care about the
Mm,
ramifications of but it's still like the old school, like I think the church has like, the Catholic Church has a lot to do with that too, and people are just very like religious, and this is how it is, and this is how it's in the Bible, word for word, it just gotta happen like this, and we it doesn't work in 2022.
you
It
know,
just
so
doesn't.
but religion has a factor in it, right? In
Yeah,
people's
absolutely.
decision making, right? I mean, I know like the Catholic Church has like historically been very against IVF, and
Mm,
you know some of the other, you know, like the Protestant religions, you know, like are like, more accepting of it. But I remember being at a conference and it was like the fourth born IVF child and like the mother, and then it was the doctor. And the doctor, I want to say, was from like Argentina or from a South American country. I want to say it was Argentina though, and maybe it was Colombia. I don't remember, but it was one of the South American countries, and they were doing IVF.
Mhm.
And the government was just like, "You're playing God. Like you can't do that." Like this is it was really against like their religious beliefs.
Right.
And he made like a good argument because he was like, I'm not playing God. I'm just facilitating a meeting because realistically, like even if you put a sperm and egg together,
Mhm.
that doesn't always result in a
Right.
live birth,
Right.
right? Or even an embryo. Like sometimes it just does not work. So I mean, now if it was 100% of the time, maybe would have an argument. But like he's like, I'm just facilitating a meeting because at that point, when you put the two and two together, it's up to God at that point. And that's exactly what like our fertility doctor, like when we did our transfer, and exactly what he said is it's up to God at this point.
I, I like that. No, yeah, for facilitating the meeting. I like that, and even like the beginning of the old school movie. Look who's talking with the or the sperms try to reach the eggs, and not all of
Yeah.
them are making it. That's basically
Yeah. I mean, you basically
that's
put like,
true.
yeah.
That's exactly. You want to see how the egg together. Just watch the opening credits of that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see it. So that's literally biologically how that forms.
Yeah.
These politicians like see like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and all these Republicans and occasional Democrats too. And it's just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. I mean, there's such a lack of fertility awareness. Like there was research that was done, and I want to say it was by Brennan Pearson, but don't quote me on that. But they looked at students that were in a master's of business administration, MBA programs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they were like, okay, these are well educated people, right? Let's look and see how much of their awareness. And like there was such a lack of awareness. Like I think 10% of the women didn't even realize they had a limited amount of eggs, like, and there's just like I said, like we always teach about prevention, right?
Right.
We don't talk about like what does this look like? Like what when if you want to have children, like what we don't talk about like what happens if you want children,
Right.
you know?
Or even after the fact, the children are here and you need resources, like,
Right.
or even like no postpartum. There's like, okay, there's not enough no therapy or people talking about like we talk about postpartum, okay, or you providing mental health treatment
Yeah.
for not just the mothers but the fathers or whatever partners like that. No, that's real, and mothers who have start addictions because like they pain pills to recover from a C-section and then they hooked on pills. Like
Yeah.
that's basically what happened to my ex-wife like, after having my son. So it's like
Yeah.
no, those things don't get talked about at all. I know one of the authors of social Latinx and social work volume one talked about her fertility struggles too. So definitely no, it's being talked about, but no, very slowly.
Yeah.
I know. I'm thinking about like celebrities that they have like these 10,001 kids. Like, are you trying to start your own like football team or like your own like freaking
Yeah.
franchise? Like, talking about Nick Cannon and like freaking like the rapper Future and have all these kids. Like, I can't imagine like how somebody might feel like they're having their fertility issues and they see like celebrities like Nick Cannon like having like he's off like his 10 kids and it's like like,
Yeah.
like
And you're like, I can't even
like what
have
are you
one.
doing like
Yeah. What I think like people see like fertility as a very individual thing, but not realizing like how much our world really is around children. I mean, I I know for like my own personal experience, like, and even for my wife, like pregnancy announcements, right? It was another stab in the back of like, okay, now I'm still isolated. Like I'm
Mm,
still stuck where in this phase of my life, I'm not able to move on. Like, and there's no control, like, children's birthday parties, first day of school, like
mm,
Halloween, right? I mean, costumes, right? I mean, like
yeah,
it's all related around children. Like, and you're triggered by a lot of this stuff, like every single day, like, and for women, it's like every month,
mm,
like my wife and I, it took 7 years, like
wow,
before we had ours, like, and we were successful with IVF, but it takes a toll on you, like, and it takes a toll on the relationship of the couple because realistically, like, for most couples, like, this is their first major crisis that they're trying to navigate.
yeah,
Before it's like you got married, maybe you waited a couple of years, like, or if you're, I mean, and then I mean the other thing too, we think about too is like people are getting married later, which
yeah,
means they're having kids later,
right,
right? Because I think I learned some statistic where in 1970 the average age of the first time mother was 21 years old,
mm,
whereas in 2019 it was 27. So I think part of it too is like, because not that I'm saying like that waiting like later in life is a bad thing, but what I was trying to say is like the culture changes, but the biology doesn't
right,
change, like, and I think the use of fertility treatments is going to be more prevalent as people like wait later and later in life,
no, no,
you know,
absolutely.
you
No,
you
people,
know,
no, people
yeah,
want
and
to
it's
start
like,
their careers and stuff. So,
right, absolutely. And it makes sense, right? I mean, it makes sense, especially the way inflation is right now, like it's the way, like, and have your good solid base. Um, like I also think about how media portrays infertility, right? Because we talk about like movies, right? And like in some of the shows, I don't really portray it, as well. But when it is portrayed, it's often with white people,
mm,
and that's like, it's a huge thing, right? Because representation matters,
no,
right?
absolutely.
And I had read a book. It was in Reproductive Ethics and Clinical Practice. This was a fun book for me, which for most people probably would not be fun, but it was a very interesting read, like, and it was Dr. Lisa Harris had written this chapter, right? And she talked about how she walked, like she was, I think she was a fertility doctor, but she walked into her practice and she looked at, a new patient and stuff, looked at the name and stuff like that. And she walks in and she's expecting a white woman, right? Because most people think it's a white woman's issue, infertility.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, there is a woman of color. And it threw her off. And she was just like, that's not right. She kind of took it upon herself to say, like, like, this happens to a lot of people,
No, absolutely.
and on my podcast, I had a reproductive endocrinologist, a fertility doctor, Dr. Ku from Dallas IVF, and he had a phrase that I thought was really super. It's funny, but it's powerful. But like infertility is an equal opportunity offender. It affects everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. Like it
Right.
impacts every race, every gender, you know, everyone. And she was looking at like, so ASRM is the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. They're like the professional organization over um, fertility medicine or reproductive medicine. And they had did like some sort of like ethics thing, like ethical study or something like that, and they had found that like women of color were 1.5 to 2 times more likely to have infertility than white women, but
Wow.
were the least or had the least access.
That it always goes to access
Right,
for black and brown folks. It's always
right.
something saying we can't get access to.
You, and I think some of that, like I said, like I'm not like I fully understand because I'm white, but
Right.
you hear the historical trauma, like when you think about all the medical trauma that like people of color like have experienced, like there's that mistrust, right? I mean, like there,
Hmm.
and it's rightfully so, like,
Right.
you know, and it was like Regina Brown, like she's on Instagram, she has a broken brown egg, and she does a lot of actually like in that space, right? And she had a post, on Instagram where she was looking at Chicago, right? So Chicago has a number of fertility clinics, and she looked at the map where all like the Chicago's a very redlined city, right? From back in the day, still is.
Yeah.
And she was looking at where the fertility clinics were located, and it was all in the white affluent neighborhoods.
Mm.
And to me, like, and that Brandon Johnson he's a licensed social worker in Richmond, and he does a lot of work in this like infertility. And he showed that like he told that me, and it's like I never would have even thought about like how a geographic location can be part of like access. Like, and it makes sense now that, I mean, he says that where, but like for me in my lens, I'm like, oh, you just travel.
Right.
But in Chicago, he said, like, if you're in the South Side and you like wanted to try to attempt IVF or IUI, like, or any like those fertility treatments, like you're traveling an hour, like you have to want to do it.
Mm.
Whereas if you're in one of those neighborhoods, it's like, oh, I'm 10, 15 minutes,
Right.
you know, and like this is just like I said, another reason why I feel like social work should be really talking about this stuff too. Like it's about access and stuff. But like I said, it's not always about fertility treatments, but even adoption,
Yeah.
right? That's the hoops you got to jump through for adoption, which historically I get. Like you just don't want to put a kid with anybody. Like,
No, of course.
but from a person struggling with infertility, they're like, you need to have like a background check, you have to have your home study,
Yeah.
you have to have references, right? You have to have people reference you about your possible parenting ability, and yet you're the one that's like wanting to have a child, you know
No,
and I think the most difficult part of this is like you're in this phase of life where you see everyone having a child, you know, and you're just like you're stuck, and you're just like then you just it's a helpless feeling because like there's really nothing that you can do
right.
physically to change this.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of people that have lost like friendships because people are just like, well, you just have to relax, or you just have to, just adopt, or,
Mm.
and kind of those phrases are like very minimizing of like the experience of what someone's feeling, like, and a lot of times the advice that people will give, they've already done the research, you already know like a lot of the stuff that you've already saying, it's, you know,
No,
it's
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, people just like I said, I think it's really about validating experiences, saying like, hey, like what would be helpful.
Yeah, and culture plays such a huge point. And I'm thinking about just the Latino, Latinx, Hispanic culture. Built, we get like we got the old school like aunts, uncles, grandparents to be like, how come you don't have a girlfriend? Where's your boyfriend? Like, when you gonna get married?
Mm-hmm.
Then you get married. It's like when you having a kid, and it's like you got fertility issues, but like that is kind of either try to have these uncomfortable conversations that family members are not going to understand, or you just in this shame and this guilt that because like the family's putting all this pressure, like okay, when you having a kid, and it's like you got to go through IVF or all these other options to even try to have a kid, so that
Yeah.
that doesn't get talked about as much either.
Mm-mm. No, and that's been like a huge thing on the podcast that I have. Like I created like this summer. It's called the Miles Podcast, but it was highlighting the male experience. But I really wanted, various perspectives on this. I wanted like different, like a cultural framework, right? Because we all come at infertility with like and how culture really plays a huge factor. Like I know like one of my colleagues, Dr. Anna Flores Locke, she talks about like machismo, like and how that's really a barrier to for a lot of couples accessing fertility treatments, because of that, like of that. Yeah, like it's just like that, like the ego is like it's not me. Yeah, like and you know, you think about like there's that piece of it, like in some cultures it's expected, right? I mean, expected, like it's, I think about collectivist cultures like, Japan, like if you don't have children, it's like you're bringing shame on the family name,
Right.
like and it's, some of it's just so deeply entrenched that, and like I said, like if we don't talk about it, it's almost like adding more stigma, right,
Yeah.
to it, like, and we have such a good opportunity to open up that door, and especially if somebody is going through counseling and stuff, and whether or not they have access to fertility treatments, which I feel like everyone should, but at this point, like if somebody doesn't have access, like you should still ask, like if somebody's in their 20s or 30s and say, hey, like, have you ever struggled with infertility? Because it's something I don't think they would ever bring up. It's kind of like the whole idea of, right, like that we would think that, like, oh, if we bring up suicide, they're going to want to, do it's this kind of the same concept. It's like, well, if they
Yeah.
want to tell us, they'll tell us. Not the case. There's so much stigma behind it. But if we open it up to opportunities to be able to discuss it, you're reducing stigma, right? I mean, Brene Brown had said it best. The only way that we can really reduce stigma and shame is by normalizing the situation. And like we do this through conversation. And what is counseling is a conversation, right?
Right.
Like I said, I feel like and even just having conversations in our classes about like, hey, this is real. Like not even is it, it's a very, I mean, not even this is real. The likelihood that people in graduate school like are either going to know somebody or are personally affected by this is pretty likely, right? Given the numbers. So not only are we just creating awareness and how as people we can help support this, we can also maybe help guide some people to go into this field, right? It might be an interest because right now, like in the state of Wisconsin, like we have 5 people in the entire state that specialize in this field. All of
Mm-hmm.
them are women. And of men, there's probably about 5 men in the entire United States that are doing this work.
Wow.
So if you think about it as a man, like if you're going through all of this stuff, right, trying to make sense of it, and even if you don't have infertility, right, your wife's going through it and you're seeing the distress
Mm-hmm.
from her end of things, and trying to make sense of it. Like he's no, like, and he's not going to probably go to a woman to talk about it. I mean, I'm not going to say 100% of the time because some,
Right.
men feel, more able to talk to women about stuff, but it's really reducing the limit, like the ability for a man. Like if a man, most, some men
Right.
would prefer to talk to this about a man or with a man, right? And especially one that's gone through,
Right.
and like I just think about like opening up those doors, and a lot of times people in the fertility world think like you've never been through it, you don't get it. On some level, that's true, right? But everybody's story is different. But I don't think infertility, and this is just my opinion on it, but I think you can build empathy on it. You can provide education on it because I've never been diagnosed with cancer, but I can imagine if I was, like, what that would look like. What would I feel?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I may feel differently about it than somebody else, but you can have that kind of that basic understanding of like, what is that like?
Right.
You know? And I think, like I said, you to truly 100% know what it's like. I think yeah, you've been through it, but I don't think that's a qualifier for like giving good treatment, like, or even finding like that listening ear, that active listening. It's not a qualifier. I mean, how many times in therapy, do we talk about things that we personally never experienced?
No, absolutely.
So, but it's providing that education that helps kind of understand like what is this like for somebody that's going through this.
Mm-hmm. I have one last question. And
Okay.
people, it also seems like a stigma in terms of vasectomies. And people don't want to talk about vasectomies either. It's like I don't like I don't want to do that. Like why you want to do that? Like it's like what's your experience, regarding that?
Well, I mean, for me, like I jokingly say, like I don't need one. It's like I was like the likelihood that my wife's gonna get pregnant naturally, like is it's small, right? It's very minimal. You know, like could it still happen? Yes. Would it be a blessing? Yes. You know, like we gladly accept that. But realistically, for like a lot of men that like it's like that have like no sperm, like or very low count, they're just like, what's the point? You know, like you know, but I think it's also being like responsible, as well, because I just think it's just being a responsible thing. Like, I don't, and a lot of times vasectomies can get reversed. So let's just say this, right? Let's just say you have a marriage, like you have kids in a previous marriage, you divorced, right? And you get a vasectomy. Now all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm with somebody new. I want to try having children with them, right? And a lot of times, vasectomies can be reversed. It's not really an easy thing to do, but it can be, like, but there's also other ways, like if they're like looking at it like, yeah, it's not going to be really that easy to do it. There's other ways of getting sperm. It's just not pleasant. So like so for men that don't have any sperm, like they do have some options to extract sperm. Okay. What that means is that they're literally, and this is going to be really cringe for a lot of men, but they stick a needle like in the testicles, right? And they obviously numb, do anesthetic out there, but like they take it and they try to extract sperm, whatever, like or see if there's any sperm in there. And a lot of times, sometimes they can extract sperm, and whether that maybe 3 or 4 of them, and use those to, possibly have a biological child. Some
Interesting.
men just are like, nope, I am not doing that. Like, it's some men are about men, but some men are like, you know what? My wife's going through how many procedures? Like if this is the one thing I have to do to help, like I'm all for it. Like, but it's not an easy surgery. Like, it's just not. Like, and yeah. So I mean, like those are options, but yeah.
Awesome. Where could people find you?
So I have 2 things on Instagram. So I have my personal page, which is SJ Miller 2024. So I do a lot of like posts about fertility stuff, advocacy and stuff, what that might be like. And then I have my podcast, which is the Miles Podcast. So you can find that on Instagram as well as like Apple and Spotify and all that. So I'm working on I've got 10 episodes for season 1. And I'm working on some episodes for season 2, which is going to be in January. And then I'm on Twitter. So the Miles Podcast on Twitter. And then on Facebook, I have the Miles Podcast page. So yeah.
Awesome.
So any of those, like I said, reach out to me. Like, yeah, message me and stuff. If I'm always game about talking about it.
No, it's something that needs to be talked about.
Yeah,
I appreciate you and thank you for having this important conversation.
yeah, absolutely.